Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to Behind the Scenes, a podcast where we explore the intersection of art, culture, and big ideas. I'm your host, Sean Malone, here as usual with Jen Maffisanti and Paul Nelson. This is a pretty momentous occasion for us. This is the last episode of this podcast. Certainly not the last time that Paul and Jen and I will be talking, but I mean, the last time we're doing it in this format. Um, just so everybody is sort of aware of the reason behind all of this and everything else as we get going. Um, also, by the way, welcome if there's anybody listening live. We're doing it live for the first time ever on our very last show, so that's kind of fun. But the reason that we're ending the series is actually my fault. I am no longer the creative director for the Foundation for Economic Education, as I took a job as executive producer for a company called Return on Ideas, where I'm going to go and make more films and YouTube series and all sorts of other things, but doing it in a slightly different environment. It's a for-profit company, not a nonprofit. We're still working with a lot of the same nonprofit clients, and I will continue to do some of the stuff I've done with Fee. Out of Frame will continue for a while. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And also Commons and Soapbox will continue. But meanwhile, Paul took over for my role at Fee. Paul's now director of marketing at Fee. And he will be continuing on making all kinds of cool stuff. And hopefully you will see some of those things in the very near future. We've got some ideas in the works. But anyway, so the major news is simply that I just don't have time really to do the podcast all the time and once a week, and it's just going to be a little bit difficult to do that. So we are going to end this series after today. But I don't know. By the way, we are going to be talking about a movie today. I'm actually super excited about this movie that we've been waiting for 2 years or 3 years almost, I feel like, when I first started hearing about it. So we're going to be talking about Top Gun Maverick in a little bit. But before I do that, I don't know, Jen, Paul, I just wanted to say it's been an absolute joy doing this every week. It's been kind of a highlight of my week most of the time. And, I'm gonna miss this. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to both of you for being awesome partners in this whole endeavor, and I want to thank you for that. So,
Well, thanks, Sean. This has been a blast, and there are no two people I would rather be doing a show like this with more than y'all. So this has been quite a ride. Quite a ride.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and it's been, for me, it's the young family having an excuse to go see movies. It's nice. So on that, I'm very appreciative. But today, as you can see, everyone that's watching, I'm back in the studio where we started the podcast originally. I thought it would be a nice little touch for the last one to come back and have a little send off for the last show. So our great producer Pavel set it up for us, and it's nice. It feels nice to be back. Obviously, I'm a little lonely today.
yeah, I feel a little guilty for not going. We didn't actually talk about it until this morning, and then I was like, well, I hadn't really planned on driving. It is like an hour and 15 minutes away from my house at this point, so it's a pretty decent drive, and I have. This is going to sound a little silly since Paul made the effort and Pavel made the effort, but I have plans, pre-existing plans with my mother-in-law to watch Stranger Things tonight. So I was going to feel pretty bad if I bailed on her. She was already kind of upset when I told her that we were doing this until 5 because she rewatched the entire series over the last couple weeks, and I know she's been really looking forward to season 4 coming out, and yeah, so we're doing that. We are not doing Obi-Wan Kenobi tonight, though, so I'm going to be behind, or I don't know, behind, but I will be risking spoilers from Kenobi, I think, but then not risking spoilers for for Stranger Things. So I guess you gotta pick your poison in this case.
Yeah, 6 of 1, really.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough. I don't know, Paul. Like, how are you? Do you have plans, Jen? Do you have plans for either of these, or are you out on both counts at this point?
We're gonna watch Kenobi tonight. We're gonna give it a shot. I'm not hopeful. Early reviews are pretty bleak, and as we've talked about on the podcast before, I don't have a lot of trust in Disney Plus right now. So I'm gonna watch it because I love Star Wars, but we'll see. I hope I'm surprised.
Disney Plus is kind of killing me right now because there are a bunch of things. They just dropped a trailer for a Willow series, which I didn't even know they were making, starring Warwick Davis and actually a lot of people from the original series, like the original movie. And man, that pulls on my nostalgia heartstrings pretty hard. But also, like, I feel like almost every time, Mandalorian being the core exception, I feel like I've been a little bit burned by a lot of these series, and I feel like it's increasingly the case. I feel like Critical Drinker said something about this like recently, but like the idea of Disney's strategy right now to be sort of like a World War I general, just throwing wave after wave after wave of new content at me, hoping that some of it will get through the lines. And I feel like that's kind of where we're at.
That on Hulk this is going over the top.
Yeah.
Oh boy, She-Hulk. I mean, yeah, there's She-Hulk and Ironheart and like just a ludicrous number of Marvel series that are coming out. Plus another, what is the new? There's a Jude Law Star Wars series that's coming out that I didn't even know about.
And it's all very hashtag content at this point. It's
that's the risk, right?
It's disappointing.
Yeah.
We never really got into Stranger Things at my house. I don't think any of us has an entire episode of the show. And I know, but like
I think you would. I think to some extent, I think you would particularly like Stranger Things. I think you would like the first season of Stranger Things, but Stranger Things is a weird one for me now because it is, it's been 3 years since the last season came. 3 years, 2 years, whatever. It feels extremely long time between seasons, and so, I mean. We ended the last season with David Harbour's character being basically like carted off to a Russian gulag. And so I have no idea where we're going to end up like with this series, but I don't know. I mean, we'll see where it goes, and I'm extremely excited about it. So we're got a shot tonight. We'll see how it goes.
Well, I mean, maybe since this is the final season, maybe we'll go back and start watching it so that we don't have to wait eternities between seasons. But
that's fair. You can't binge the entire series by the time you get probably to the end there. But
but I will say, as a family, we've been doing some rewatches lately. With the kids, we started rewatching Avatar: The Last Airbender, and that's just such a delight still. It's such a delight. And after the kids go to bed, my husband and I have been rewatching Justified.
Great choice.
So we just started season 2 on that one, and it's still so good.
I feel like Justified. First of all, Justified is an amazing show, and it's got a special place in my heart. Period. For all sorts of reasons, but one thing that really weirdly stands out for me personally, and this is very name droppy of me, but the last time I traveled before the pandemic started for 2 years, I went to Los Angeles for a premiere and I met Nick Searcy at that premiere. And so like my very last traveling experience was like getting to hang out with Nick Searcy for a minute and talked to him about Justified, which was very, very exciting. And then everything went in the garbage for 2 years. So,
Yeah, that is what happened. That is
So,
what
yeah.
happened.
but
If you guys, Severance over on Apple TV Plus, by the way, I this was in our
I
email.
saw your
I
recommendation.
know
Yeah.
I still haven't started that
You just
yet.
got to
but
get around to it is the thing.
yeah,
Once you start, it's going to be hard to stop. But Apple, I mean, I touched on this in the email, but they are quietly putting together
Yeah.
an impressive
Yeah.
list of shows.
They
and
really
it's
are.
quickly becoming, I mean, it doesn't have the depth like an HBO Max, but every show I've watched on Apple TV Plus has been good, surprisingly good.
yeah.
I finished Severance, and then I went and watched Slow Horses, which is not the greatest thing on TV, but it's fun.
I think my parents recommended Slow Horses to me. I have not
I
watched
haven't
that
heard
yet
anything
either.
about it. This is the first
Exactly.
time.
That's Apple TV Plus in a nutshell. You haven't heard anything about it, but they're just quietly doing just
Yeah.
amazing stuff.
Well, it is
I will-
weird, right? Because stuff like Ted Lasso sort of breaks out, and you're like, oh yeah, everybody's like, oh, you got to watch Ted Lasso, or we told everybody to watch Mythic Quest and stuff like that. But it's quiet. It's real quiet. They
is
do
real
not
quiet.
seem to be putting a lot into marketing. But you know what I've been watching lately before we segue into our main event here. I've been watching a show that I'm like 9 seasons behind on now, called Alone, which is a survival reality show, more or less, where a group of people are basically dropped on some remote part of the world and are required to survive there for up to 90, or in one season's case, 100 days. And whoever's left last standing, like, they can tap out at any time, but they are there by themselves with a backpack containing 10 items of their choice, in addition to clothes, and they have to figure out shelter, food, water, the whole deal, and survive for 3 months, basically.
Huh.
And it is it aligns to a bunch of things that I like watching. Like, I watch a lot of like survival stuff on YouTube, and I really enjoy that kind of thing. But the thing that's like amazing to watch about that series, if you don't take your like existence for granted, right, is how much ridiculous work it is to just find basic things like food and shelter, and how to continually maintain your body weight, like your health, your mental health. Like, all of these things are so difficult that within a 3-month period, I mean, in the first season, which I watched the 7th season because that's what kind of got me interested in it, and then I've gone back to the first season. The first season, people, half the 10 people who start out the series are tapped out within a week. Like, they don't even last a single week on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And that is nuts to me. Like, these are all trained survival, people. These are all people who like have a legitimate shot at being able to make it for a decent amount of time. It's not like random people who've never been in the situation before. And they find it to be so grueling. And there's bears and wolves and cougars and things like that they have to be on the lookout for, in addition to the fact that they like have to use bow and arrows or fishing nets to acquire all of their food and stuff. So it's insane. But I keep putting that into context with like memes that I see all the time, which say things like, the average medieval peasant spent 150 days a year working, and then the rest of it was leisure time, which is like, that's just, if you believe that to be true, you are an insane person. Like, they did 150 days a year working for the king or the Lord or the church. Every other spare minute of every day, their entire lives, was spent doing this kind of stuff: hunting, gathering, trying to, farm something in rough conditions, avoiding predators, avoiding invading armies, and avoiding, just thieves and things like that. I mean, if you don't walk away from this kind of thing with like a deep appreciation for the abundance that we have, that is a product of a deeply complex market, global market economy, like you just don't have your eyes open at the end of the day. Which is kind of why I love watching those kinds of shows. But I don't know.
Some people's
Anyway,
children.
It's true. Let's get into it though. Speaking of another show that I feel like, or another movie that's been a long time coming, both in the sense that it's several decades in the making, but also in the sense that it's been something that we've been anticipating for 2.5 years at this point. Top Gun Maverick, starring Tom Cruise, a shockingly rare appearance from Val Kilmer, which I was kind of happy to see and pleased to see, as sad as it kind of is in a lot of ways. But I think they handled that very, very well. For those who don't know, Val Kilmer's been, I don't know how you wouldn't know this at this point, but he's kind of been out of the public spotlight for a long time because he's been battling cancer, throat cancer. Man, yeah. I don't know, guys. Did you let me start by asking, did you watch the original film before going to see Maverick?
Yes.
I did. All yes. Right. When was the last time you'd watched Top Gun? It's been a minute for me, for sure.
Probably 15 years.
Probably about 15 years.
As long as we're not counting, the epic tributes in Archer, then yeah, it's been probably a decade or more.
I had a moment reading the credits in Top Gun Maverick, by the way, where the Admiral Gates, who's one of the characters in the film, is played by an actor named Charles Parnell, and my brain read that as Chris Parnell. And I turned to Marion and I'm like, why isn't H. John Benjamin in this movie? Like, that would be the most amazing. Like, he just a bit part, just like a guy in the background, but I would love to see H. John Benjamin somewhere in the background, just, operating some machinery. Maybe he's the signaler, on deck or whatever. I don't know, whatever it is, but I would just love for Archer to be in this movie. But
I think when they first started really talking about this movie, like 2.5 years ago, I looked at you. This was when we were all still like in office at Fee, and Sean and I used to sit next to each other in the office. I turned to you and was like, if this is not just a 2-hour long Archer episode, what are they even doing with their lives? But it wasn't, and it's fine.
It's not, but it's fine. I will say, they like, especially at the beginning, it's like a mirror image of the original Top Gun, like down to the music, Danger Zone, the whole thing. And it really just but so I want to talk about that a little bit, because this movie obviously has a large amount of nostalgia for the original film. It's got a lot of sort of fan service for the original film. But I actually think that it was all handled really, really well. The beginning is, as I said, like down to the music, all pretty much identical to the original Top Gun. And so for the first 5 minutes of the film, you basically get, Faltermeyer's score combined with like Danger Zone, and then all of the like the takeoffs and landings of what are now F-18s, originally F-14s, on a aircraft carrier, basically. So it's all these like naval planes flying around and stuff. And I don't know, for me, it was like, it could have been really, like, it is on the nose, but it kind of brought it back in a good way for me. The only area where I felt like that wasn't really true is that there's like a literal flashback to older movie footage. And I don't know if I feel like the statute of limitations is like wildly gone on the original Top Gun, but for those who haven't seen the original Top Gun, part of probably the most important part of that movie is that Tom Cruise's character's radio intercept officer, the backseat guy in the plane, Goose, gets killed when they're trying to eject. And so there's a flashback of that moment. And like, that's the only part that felt like kind of wrong to me, actually, in that sense. Just because I felt like it kind of stepped on the emotion of the scene, but it's basically like Tom Cruise sees Miles Teller's character, who's Goose's son, and has some feelings about it. And I kind of would have liked to just sit with Tom Cruise's feelings about it rather than flashback in that moment. But other than that, for me, I felt like all of the old stuff, all of that kind of thing, I thought that all worked really, really well. How did you guys feel about the kind of the nostalgic quality to it?
I really liked it. It didn't feel ham-fisted. It felt like this was very much a natural progression from
Yeah.
the original Top Gun story. And like we can see that Maverick has developed as a character in the intervening years. I mean, he's still Maverick, but
Yeah.
he's gotten older. He's experienced more things. He understands more what it means to lose people.
Yeah.
And he's made some tough choices in the past that maybe he's not necessarily proud of, but he's sticking by because he had good reason. Like we can
Yeah.
see that there was development off screen, but his character in this movie is not so wildly divergent from the original Maverick that it doesn't make sense,
No, I think they do his character really a lot of justice in
Yeah.
this for those reasons. I think he's developed more. He didn't like regress and forget all of the lessons that he learned in the. So I mean, again, going back to like the whole point with Goose and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there are a couple lessons that he learned in that movie that are really formative to his character, because his character is kind of terrible for the majority of Top Gun, right? He's super arrogant. He is like pretty reckless. Actually, he does a lot of things to kind of tick off superior officers for really no reason at all, like just because he's funny. And so, but what he learns a couple things. One, he learns, this is a thematic lesson, sort of never leave your wingman, which is a big issue that he does right off the bat in the movie and then gets berated for, but also which causes serious problems to the guy that he left, basically. And so ends up getting his wingman into a position that sort of causes him to watch out of the Navy, actually, a really excellent pilot. And so that's one thing that he has to learn. And then another thing, obviously, he has to learn is about loss, and that he's not immortal, right? And that the people that he cares about can be killed by the recklessness of his actions. And the thing that I like about Top Gun Maverick is that, unlike a lot of movies we've seen lately where they bring back old characters, like comes back in in The Last Jedi, and he's just regressed to being the same old sort of smuggler that's off by himself. Like all of that character development that, Luke Skywalker, same thing, actually didn't even regress, just became a completely different character, right? But Maverick feels like he learned all those things, he internalized them, he is still Maverick. He's still the guy who's going to sort of do his own thing and kind of disobey orders and all that kind of stuff. But now he's not doing it in a reckless way. He's doing it in a way heroic in some cases. Like he's going to ignore mission parameters where it makes sense, or he's going to ignore, direct orders in service of his team, which is like, that felt pretty good to me, I thought. But anyway,
Yeah.
Paul, sorry.
Yeah, the nostalgia aspect, they really hit it hard the first 10, 15 minutes of the movie, but then it was pretty much done afterwards, which a lot of times, especially with Star Wars and all this stuff and the member berries, it's a continuous drug, because they're like, oh, we're kind of stuck. We need to bring somebody back or make a reference to something. But this was basically the exact opening of the original Top Gun, but Top Gun Maverick. And then it became its own story, which was fantastic. The thing that I was looking for the most. The first part of the first opening act of the movie was, if you guys remember, there was a big hubbub when the trailer came out 3 years ago now, where he puts on his iconic leather jacket with all the patches, and they had replaced the Taiwanese flag with a fictional flag to try to appease the CCP. And as soon as he put his jacket on, my eyes were looking for the patch, and sure enough, they kept the Taiwanese flag on there. And to me, that was a signal that we're here to make a good movie. We're not here to play 2022 politics. And for me, it was like, all right, time to just have a good time. This is going to be fun. And they did it magnificently.
Yeah. I mean, look, my goodness, we need to talk probably right off the bat. I mean, if you're looking for aerial action, I don't think I've ever seen a movie with more impressive shots, more dogfights, more just ludicrously like on the edge of your seat sort of flying sequences. I don't know about your guys' theater, but in mine, like Tom Cruise shows up before the movie starts and does the whole like thank you spiel for watching the movie and stuff. And he says, he's like, we tried to make this the most authentic, naval aviation movie that's ever been made. It's real planes, it's real G's, and you feel it every step of the way. That stuff matters so much. Like when people are actually getting thrown around in the cockpit, and it is not it's not an actor just throwing themselves against the side. There's weight there, there's danger there, and it all comes across. And I mean, granted, I think we've all come to kind of expect that from Tom Cruise. I think that's just kind of because he kind of seems like he has a death wish, but in a way it's almost Jackie Chan in nature. I don't know if this is a reference that everybody's going to appreciate, but like the thing that makes all of the early Jackie Chan movies, all of the Hong Kong Fu stuff really, really great, is that they were doing all of those stunts. Like he was really getting lit on fire. He's really hanging from the side of a truck. Like he's really falling 20 feet and landing on a table or whatever. He was doing all of that stuff because that's just what they kind of had to do at the time. But as a result, like you feel it, it feels real. Like every aspect of it feels like it is what it is, which is not a stunt guy doing a stunt or like a green screen thing that allows him to kind of be, CGI'd into a plane or whatever. Like he's there, he's doing it. And that is super impressive. I think I don't know if like logically there's going to be like strides made from this movie in terms of cinematography, but like it is extremely impressive. I think we've lost Jen here, but we can keep talking about this, man. Like it's, whew.
Yeah, looks like we lost Jen, but yeah, I was watching a behind the scenes video, and the techniques, they had to take 15 months to try to figure out how to fit all of these cameras inside the cockpit of the F-18. And there was 6 cameras within each cockpit with the actors. And they apparently they captured more aerial footage than all 3 of the Lord of the Rings trilogy movies. And I mean, the amount of stuff they shot and doing it over with real planes, real pilots.
Yeah.
It's a monumental feat what they did. And I do think there's going to be some pretty big strides as far as technology for the camera business, because they're putting these cameras are not small by any stretch of the imagination. There's big cameras in tiny spaces. Lenses had to be specially fitted for this stuff with the speed that they were doing. And comparing the footage that they had when they did the flashbacks that you were talking about earlier to what they had from the 80s, it's like, oh, that looks terrible.
Yeah.
But
which is funny because like, watching that first, I was like, yeah, this is pretty good. Like this actually, it holds up pretty well. And then you watch this and it's like, holy cow. I mean, and plus some of the stunts that they did just inherently are insane. But I think it's so important that, oh man, okay, so we have to talk about this. So the plot, let me talk about the plot of the movie a little bit. Like, I feel like we're into this enough where we can kind of talk a little bit spoilers and stuff. So the plot of this movie is basically Tom Cruise, 20 years later is working as a test pilot for the Navy, and he's like at the sort of upper end of like, you know, experimental planes. And so he is in, I don't know what they called the model or whatever, but it basically looks like an SR-71, and it's they're trying to break speed barriers. He's trying to break ultimately he's trying to break Mach 9, and then Ed Harris shows up out of nowhere. 90-year-old Ed Harris shows up to basically tell him that drones are the future of the military, and that he's a dying
drone
breed.
ranger.
The drone ranger.
Right? And so so he's basically trying to shut down their experimental, their experimental plane and their test flights and stuff, unless he can make it to Mach 10. And so Mach 9 is, I mean, I don't even know how to explain this to people. It's 10 times the speed of sound. And it is ludicrously hard on the human body to even go the speed of sound, let alone 4, 5, 6 times the speed of sound. And once you get into Mach 7, 8, 9, you're talking about gravitational force, simulated gravity, basically, at a level we were talking about thousands of pounds of pressure being put on your chest, your lungs, your skull, everything else. And it is, you need special suits for this. You need, all kinds of things to sort of help withstand these kinds of forces. And so the whole thing is like Tom Cruise, of course, pushing that Mach 9 all the way. Mach 9 was their goal for the test flight, but then of course they get thrown this audible by Ed Harris. And so they have to go to Mach 10. And, Maverick being Maverick obviously tries to push the limit even further than that. But some of the shots, man, of that sequence, this is right at the beginning of the movie, right after the nostalgia bit, like Paul was saying, like right after we get through like the mirror image opening from the 80s movie to today. And then some of the shots, especially the high altitude stuff, looking at this plane flying across the earth, are beautiful, like mind-blowingly beautiful shots of this plane that is, for all intents and purposes, a rocket that's just not going to outer space. I mean, it is an insanely fast plane. And yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And so like that just sets the tone for me for like the kind of visuals we're going to see throughout this thing. And it really doesn't disappoint the rest of the way through, because basically he ends up, being pulled back to Top Gun and as an instructor, which if you remember the first Top Gun, so I was actually curious about this going in too, because at the end of the first Top Gun, he actually asked to be an instructor. And I was like, well, in the trailer, he says that he's a terrible instructor. And I'm like, well, yeah, but the end of the first movie is you going to be an instructor. Well, they explain that pretty quickly, that he washes out as an instructor in like a couple months because he's a terrible instructor, which is fair and probably accurate to that character, right? But they bring him back because they're going to do a mission that is an actual, live fire, wartime mission where they have to go blow up a nuclear site, basically in an unnamed country, controlled by an unnamed enemy, which I think is kind of the goofiest part of this movie. They are very coy about who we are fighting. It's just the enemy flying 5th generation planes. We don't know what they are. Anyway, that's all fine. But like the whole point is that he has done some things in the mission. The mission is going to take some incredibly virtuosic flying, and it's going to take the, impressive dogfighting skills, which are things that, the Navy doesn't really even do much anymore. By the way, and I can pause for a second and we can get back into this in a little bit if you want. But I talked with my dad about Top Gun, about his thoughts on the original. He hasn't seen Maverick yet, but I talked with my dad about the original Top Gun. My dad was first a navigator and then a pilot in the Air Force for F-4s. And he flew F-4s in the 80s, in the late 80s, right around the time Top Gun was made. And so I asked him what his thoughts on the original Top Gun film was. And he said there's some things that like the F-14 couldn't do, like physically couldn't do as a plane, that they do in that movie, and there's some things that are sort of made up. But he said that the attitude of the pilots, and the nature of Top Gun. The Air Force, by the way, has a similar program called Red Flag, which is basically the Air Force's version of Top Gun. And he said all the guys who participate in those programs are exactly those guys. Like, they're everything that you see on screen as the attitude of those pilots and everything. And he said something to me, by the way, again, not having seen this movie, that really tracked for me, because they make a big deal out of it. Tom Cruise makes a big deal out of it. He says, ever since basically when he became a pilot, when he went to pilot's training, people started treating him differently. Like, and everybody inside the Air Force or the Navy or the Marines or even the Army, I suppose, but like, especially the Navy and the Air Force, which have, the vast majority of the fighters, they start treating their pilots like these rock stars. And so, like, everybody tells them from the very beginning that they are the best, and that they're the best of the best, and all that kind of stuff. And as my dad said, like, you kind of have to believe that, because if you don't believe that you're the best of the best, if you don't have that level of confidence to fly one of these planes, you're flying, in some cases, 2,000 miles an hour or whatever, right? Like, it's absolutely, or, a lot faster in this movie. You can die very, very quickly flying one of these planes. So believing in yourself, believing that you have, that kind of ability is probably the most important piece of all of this. But Tom Cruise makes a point about this to John Hamm's character in this movie, because he says, well, these guys are the best already. He says, yeah, they've been told that since they were basically in pilot training. And now they need to learn that they are not, that they don't know everything, and that they need to actually, like, humble themselves a little bit, which I think is such a great, again, going back to what Jen had said earlier, it's such a great advancement for Tom Cruise's character, for the Maverick character, because he was that guy. Now he is older and wiser, and has experienced some loss and some pain and all of those things. And so now he's trying to impart some of these lessons to the younger guys. And it feels super organic to me, to the character and what he's been through and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I found it interesting. I had a 45-minute conversation with my dad about Top Gun last night, and that was pretty valuable to me. But he was pretty much a fan, really, of the original movie. He didn't really have a lot to say that was like negative. And part of that is he's not like nitpicking technology and stuff like that, which you could do in that movie. Yeah. But I don't know. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say about this movie, because I think he's going to be blown away by a lot of it, frankly. So,
yeah, my husband and I have a friend who was a naval aviator back in the 80s. And of course, whenever he and his buddies would go out, they would tell everybody that they flew F-14s, especially after Top Gun came out. But he told us about how pilots actually get their call signs. And I really wanted to share this little piece of inside information with everyone, because pilots have the coolest call signs. Okay. They sound
like Bob.
Like Bob. But generally speaking, they sound so cool. For example, my friend's call sign was Crusher, right? But the thing of it is that pilots do not choose their own call signs.
I don't even know what my dad's was, by the way.
They are assigned call signs by their superior. And it's usually because of a situation where they screwed up. So my buddy got the call sign Crusher because he once accidentally closed the canopy on his backseater's hand and really broke some of his fingers. And so his backseater's call sign was Knuckles. Crusher and Knuckles. And that's how they got their call signs. I mean, they're amazing call signs. They sound really badass, but
they sound cool.
They screwed up. They screwed up. And so they get to live with that forever now.
That is, yeah, I don't know. I actually don't know my dad's call sign. There's a photo of him that was always in the house with his helmet on, and I bet I could read it in there, but I haven't actually like been in the same room as that photo in several years. So I'm not really sure what it was, and I didn't bother to ask last night. I don't really remember. I was too young fundamentally. I mean, my dad quit flying when I was probably 3 or 4 years old, something like that. I mean, I think what happened was, and I think I mean, especially as I'm older, I mean, I certainly understand this, but like, he was. My dad told me last night that he was at the time. I assume he meant like more locally, but maybe nationally. He was the youngest officer in the Air Force at one point, or at least in his state. He was actually in the Air National Guard, but he, went to all the Air Force training stuff. He became an officer at 20. And we were talking about this last night because apparently it's super rare for a backseater to become a pilot later. And I asked him like why that's so rare, and he said, well, you typically age out of being eligible to go to pilot training at 26 or 27 years old. So most guys, if they go to college first, maybe they don't start pilot training or navigator school or something like that until they are 24, 25. So like by the time they're actually flying, you're kind of in one or the other, you're kind of in one camp. But he went to navigator school at 20, I think, or 21 maybe. And so he still had a lot of time. And so after he flew as a backseater for a little while, I forget, he was I forget exactly what because there's different versions of that. There's like weapon systems operators and things like that. He said he was something else. I don't quite remember. Anyway, he flew reconnaissance planes, so I'm sure that it was a lot of like, tech stuff. But then he went back to pilot training and became a pilot instead, and so then had to go to F4 school and all that kind of stuff. But it's pretty rare apparently that people are both. But that's a really interesting thing to me, because the idea of like not really having control over the plane, but being in it seems more terrifying actually than being a pilot. Like it seems way less terrifying to be able to actually be the one in charge of where the plane is headed and whatnot. Yeah, and there's a lot in this movie that I think really captures that. It captures the kind of just the sheer like mix of exhilaration and terror that I feel like the whole thing is at the same time. And I think this movie does a really good job sort of
and like
balancing.
that, the amount of physical work that goes into flying these planes is astonishing. Like we tend, my family and I like to go to air shows. We watch a lot of videos on YouTube and on various sciencey type channels about like the physics involved in all of this, and it's bonkers. It is absolutely bonkers. And I love that was pointed out in this movie, and you can see the physicality that it takes in the shots that they have of these actors playing pilots. And I mean, Tom Cruise points out that when you make like a 10G pull to get out of that valley, it's like 2,000 pounds. Like you suddenly weigh 2,000 pounds, and that's legit. It's a lot. It is a lot.
Well, and that's going back to what I said about aging out. That's part of why pilots fighter pilots age out, because the human body, I mean, especially as you get older, just literally physically can't take it. So, I think, I don't know if there's like a specific age cutoff, but by 35, I mean, you're pretty much ineligible to be a fighter pilot anymore. And it makes sense, which is one of the things that's like probably the most unrealistic about this, right? Is that you've got 50 whatever year old Tom Cruise, still working as a fighter pilot and not at
Still the
some
best
point.
one.
Yeah.
And the best one, really.
I mean,
yeah.
I'm 37, and the idea of squatting more than my own body weight is just not about that life. Sorry.
I do I have a theory about Top Gun Maverick. I don't know if I want to get to it yet. It doesn't really contain spoilers, so to speak, but we talked about the ending of his test flight, getting to Mach 10 and then pushing it above and having that absolutely spectacular crash, meteor shower.
Come apart.
Uh,
Rapid,
So my-
unplanned disassembly.
There you go.
Midair disassembly. Yeah.
So my theory, and I don't know if you guys thought about this, but he died in that. To me, he died in that plane. There's no way you could survive that. So
I mean, I suppose you could eject, but like you're ejecting
to
it.
where space? I mean, but to me, the rest of the movie was basically purgatory, and him working through these issues he still had. Because, and this is what was so interesting to me, is that throughout this was, Iceman can't bail you out again. He's, after a very emotional scene with Val Kilmer, but
yeah,
it's a constant thing that you miss these chances in your life, and it's him trying to reconcile in the afterlife with not having a family, not advancing in his career, and holding back his best friend's son from becoming what he wanted to do with his life. It's just something that I thought about. Obviously it's
I feel like you're wrong.
I mean,
but
it's an interesting headcanon, but I don't subscribe to it, but it's interesting.
Yes, that's what I would say. I think that like that is it's actually a more reasonable interpretation than that every event in this movie was real. However, I think this movie was presenting it as all being real.
Tom Cruise got out of that plane somehow, and that line that that kid had at the diner when he asked, "Where am I?" Earth.
Yeah. By the way, people in the audience called that one way out. Like, what guy behind me? He was like, "Where am I?" And the guy behind me was like, "Earth." I don't know. And then the kid said it, but I had a pretty good crowd actually. It was like a decent size. It wasn't like fully packed or anything, but there was a decent number of people in the theater. And they were all super engaged in the movie, which was nice, including like some younger folks who were like a little bit on and off their phones and things like that. But it was pretty good. We should talk about the sort of elephant in the room that I feel like is, especially for Out of Frame, is just the ludicrous naval propaganda aspect of all of this, which the original Top Gun, this Top Gun, tons and tons of war movies have, this movie, I can't even imagine how much money the Pentagon spent making this movie, basically, and just giving one gigantic film subsidy to the scot-free folks and to Skydance and whoever else, Paramount, participated in this. But I mean, this movie was shot on actual aircraft carriers. They used a bunch of F-18s. They used a bunch of, or at least a handful of F-14s. I don't know what they were using for their, it may be in our research document here, but I don't know what planes they were using for their quote Gen 5 fighters, but I think F-22s currently qualify as Gen 5 aircraft. I'm not really sure what. I don't remember what they were using, because they did what they did with the MiGs in the first Top Gun, which were just like F5s that they just painted black. Which I will say, my dad told me that that's actually what they do in Top Gun school. They just basically their MiGs are that. I feel like hopefully this won't get anybody in trouble, but my dad also told me that they have real MiGs that they fly against, or they had real MiGs at the time. And I asked him why they didn't use the actual MiGs if they were like doing this in conjunction with the actual Top Gun school. And he was like, I don't think the Navy wanted the Russians to know that they had MiGs and that they were training with MiGs at the time. So apparently they actually had MiGs that they could have flown against. But
that doesn't surprise me. And something along those lines with this movie. The the reintroduction of Maverick with the Dark Star program. It's not a real program at all. But in order to do those close-up shots with like Tom Cruise next to the plane, they built like a life-size, a full-size model, like an amalgamation of a few speculative theoretical designs of aircraft. And apparently like the Chinese thought we actually had one of these things and like repositioned a satellite to take pictures of this fake plane.
That's the trick of all of this, right? Like this is intersecting with the real world of military planes and national security stuff that's in geopolitics and all that kind of thing, which is why I think it's kind of funny. I get it, but at the same time, like you feel the hand of a producer where they are unable or unwilling to say the name of the enemy, right? They could have said and by the way, I also think that this is the one area of the movie that wasn't very creative, because at the very least, what I would have done is I would have invented an enemy. I would have said like some terrorist group or something like that I've named, right? I've created a fictional terrorist group and said they have these things, because it's pretty clear that they are in the mountains of Iran, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, somewhere like that. I mean, that's what the final sort of mission is, right? It's somewhere, in that kind of part of the world. And it's fairly clear that that's what they're going for. And then also, there's I don't want to spoil too much of this, but there is an F-14 that gets involved. And what we've learned in our looking into all of this is that Iran is the only country that's still using, active F-14. So you could say it's Iran. You could also just go with Russia as a stand-in, but obviously you will never say it's China, because you clearly can't ever be China, who's the bad guy in any of these things. But I think it's odd that they like have a nameless enemy. Like that actually feels weirder to me than just fictionalizing an enemy. Like just inventing an enemy would have been better. It
felt like a cop out. I mean, if you can invent MiG-28s,
you're inventing planes, right?
Top Gun, a name for this fifth gen.
And they invented
random name generators on like.
Right. I think that leaving it open-ended, though, to play devil's advocate here, is that when the original Top Gun came out, everyone knew who we were fighting against. It was the Soviet Union. You didn't need to say it. With this one, we don't really have any geopolitical enemies on that same level. So leaving it open-ended, it's open to your interpretation. It could be China. It could be Russia. It could be Iran. But I mean, really, the United States doesn't have another power to really hold itself against.
But see, I think you could still do that.
Terrorist group, it's like whatever. Okay, terrorist group of the week.
But I feel like what's weird about it is like not picking a thing, right? Like I think what's weird about it is because what it does, I think from a narrative standpoint, especially from a dialogue standpoint, is force people into saying things that no person would ever say, right? Nobody would be like the enemy. They would say China. They would say Russia. They would say, okay, so the Russians have this plane and it's really dangerous. The enemy has this plane. Nobody speaks like that. So it ends up being like this kind of awkward aspect of the film. Now, granted, I'm ludicrously nitpicking because outside of that, everything else is spectacular. But it is a thing that like takes you out of the reality of the world. Like everything else is, as Tom Cruise said before the movie started, so meticulously realistic. And then you get to like the fake enemy. And I'm like, well, all right. I mean, like that's weird. But I agree with you. I mean, it's not the Cold War. It doesn't feel exactly the same. Of course, you could pretty easily make Russia out to be the big bad in this movie, and it would track the same way that it tracked before. But I don't know. I mean, that just was a thing that just sort of stands out to me as kind of awkward and odd. But Man, I don't know. I've got a lot good to say about this, though. I mean, I think in general, how do you guys feel? You know, I brought it up. We didn't really like explore it that much. How do you guys feel about I mean, because in general, I don't like the aspect of war propaganda or all of the sort of, you know, taxpayer dollars that go into this kind of stuff. But I also have like the alternate sense I have with some of these things is that, like, you literally couldn't make a movie like this, period. With that, now maybe we should sacrifice that for, you know, the sake of not having such a ludicrously large, you know, and excessive military. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know. I feel like to some extent you work with the tools that you have when you're telling stories as a filmmaker. But at the same time, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about a lot of this because it just feels really gross when you think about it. But then at the same time, you're like, man, that was cool. So I don't know how to like track, like, sort of deal with these things. It's like, this is horrible, and I really don't support this, but my God, that was awesome. And I don't know what to do about that.
I mean, that's kind of where I fall on it. It was, I don't know.
I mean, look,
it was awesome, but at the same time, I'm like, naval recruitment's going to go through the roof again.
Yeah. So go on, Paul. Sorry.
I probably have a slightly different feeling about this. Yeah, obviously it's propaganda. I mean, obviously, I don't think anybody would argue with that. It's a big commercial for the U.S. Navy.
There's a moment in this, by the way, that is pretty much like, I think Admiral Gates, like, just looks at the camera almost. Like, he's still, like, slightly off, but he pretty much looks at the camera as like, you can be all you can be or whatever, which is just like, boom, join the Navy, everybody. Yeah. Like, join naval aviation.
Here's the thing about America and where I'm fine with this, and I think is actually something that we, as libertarians, we should probably be okay with, because if we can release a movie like this that can realistically make people think that this is what the U.S. military can do and what the kind of people are flying those planes, you know, the good guys coming to save the day. At the end of the day, that might stop wars. This is all hypothetical, of course. It might stop wars and make China try to take pictures and reposition satellites. And there's a reason this stuff works, is because, I mean, it's when you make good stuff, then it's gonna resonate with people regardless of where they are. And frankly, it's really cool. So, it's hard for me to say, I can't do this, because if you're gonna spend money, I'd rather have you spend money flying planes really cool and let me see it than go bomb another area somewhere else. So like,
so there is an element of that, right? Like, there's certainly an element of like, look, if you've got these planes, one, you've got to do exercises with them, you've got to do all these training things anyway, so you might as well film it and make it awesome, first of all. But secondly, like, yes, I would rather I don't wholly oppose the idea of sort of speak softly and carry a big stick, right? Like that sort of Teddy Roosevelt kind of idea of like, we don't want to get into wars, but we also want people to sort of think of us as invincible enough that starting a war is a bad idea, right? And I think there are elements of that I'm sort of okay with. The other thing that you brought up, though, that's interesting to me, this is another part of my conversation with my dad that I think was kind of fascinating, was he was talking about Army programs that they have in development right now where they're trying to use CG technology and projectors to project he is not making this up, holographic armies onto landscapes in order to sort of be more intimidating, essentially. And we got into a conversation. Got into this whole conversation about drones, like, because that debate is happening, right? Like the Ed Harris thing, like, that's a real debate that happens all throughout the military. Like, do you even need pilots? Do you even need, human pilots in aircraft, right? Instead of having everything be drones flown remotely, et cetera. And obviously the argument on the one side is that drones allow you to fly risk-free, essentially, to the human being, right? Like you're risking technology, you're risking $1 million of aircrafts and things like that. But, they can pretty much fly forever. They don't really necessarily need to land because you don't have a human pilot inside. So the only thing that would make them land is maintenance issues or technical failures. You can always refuel midair and keep them going. And then you've got pilots who are never in harm's way. They're never, getting shot at, whatever. Except for the other side of this, which I fall more on this side of everything, is that you also end up with a situation where the human being is severely removed from the destruction that they're causing. So it's a lot easier to treat things like a video game, and you end up with stuff that you've seen from Obama through Trump through Biden, where there are drone strikes that kill innocent people, that sort of cause a tremendous amount of destruction. And the sentiment by the drone operators is just sort of like, yeah, this is fine. And not just the operators, but the people calling the shots, because there's not, they're not risking anything. And I think that there's some element of this that would actually make war be a lot less likely if we're not automating a lot of this stuff. We're making it all remote. And then you also get to the other issue where it's like, if we just have armies of droids fighting each other, why are we fighting? We're just throwing junk at each other that will end up like destroying towns, leaving heavy metals all over the planet that are poisoning people and animals and stuff like that. And like if we're not willing to send actual human beings to fight, why are we fighting? Period. Like this, it immediately becomes like this really ludicrous thing to me. Like
that was a conversation that I had with one of my friends in high school when the Phantom Menace came out.
Yeah, like why you're fighting droids, dude?
If it's just robot against robot, and all you're risking is stuff.
The table. Go back to the diplomacy table.
Then, one, why are you even doing it? And then two, what does it even mean to anybody?
Yeah,
nothing. There's no incentive not to. Yeah. And you're just wreaking all of this havoc and wasting all of these resources. And for what?
But I think we're sort of headed that way in the real world. Like we're actually sort of headed towards a more automated, more drone-based, more remote, like the Army's developed remote tanks, right? Like there's remote tanks. There's not just drones, right? There's drone tank. You know what my dad did say though? And again, this goes back to like, dang, that's cool and also terrifying, is I think he was saying with the F-22 has the ability, the pilot of an F-22 actually has the ability to co-fly a group of drones around his own plane. So you can be an F-22 pilot and have like a phalanx of drones flying with you in tandem that you are controlling and operating as the pilot of the F-22.
I mean, dang, that's cool. But
yeah, this is a whole weird Brave New World situation that's happening here that I'm not totally okay with, but also, dang, that's cool.
Yeah.
I don't know what to
that's
do.
Where we're at. Like, let's upfront, out in the open. I'm not mad that this movie exists.
No, it's a very cool movie.
It's like, I'm fine. It's fine. But I don't know, that other stuff that we've been talking about just now.
So let me turn the tide a little bit and say the thing that I like the most about this movie, especially in light of the Out of Frame episode that I put out today, and just in general what I've been talking about with Out of Frame for a while, which is like heroism in film. This is a movie that gets that right, and that a lot of, I mean, we've talked about this endlessly on a lot of the TV shows. Disney Plus especially, I feel like, fails at this all the time. But screenwriters seem to really have a backwards understanding of morality. This is a movie where all of the core characters are, firstly, in the big picture, working to prevent nuclear war. Essentially, they're working to stop the means of an enemy from having the ability to launch nuclear missiles, which I think is, noble by itself. But more importantly, they actually do heroic things consistently throughout the movie, saving each other, sort of actually, like, again, those moments where like Tom Cruise is disobeying orders, he's doing so in service of making sure that his team comes back alive rather than just essentially sending them to their death. And then even within that, like, there's a lot of moments where, people are actually working together to try to defend other human beings. I found that to be really refreshing, and that's like an aspect of it that feels like a throwback to the 80s. But it was really good to see. And by the way, it didn't do any of the everybody's depressing and horrible now. Like, everybody was pretty decent, like you get the same kind of moments from the first Top Gun where, there's always like, there's one arrogant guy who's supposed to be sort of the villain, like the Iceman type of character, right? In this case, he's called Hangman. So they're really like leaning into that pretty aggressively. But, the moment where Hangman gets, and sorry, this is I guess it's a massive spoiler compared to other stuff, but like, Hangman eventually is not tapped for the mission. He's not on the A team for the mission. And, you think that he's going to be a jerk about this and say something horrible to Miles Teller's character, Rooster. But he doesn't. Instead, he says, give him hell, man. Like, crush it. Right. Which, first of all, I think is more accurate and more true to life in the way that people actually behave than the guy's like genuinely horrible person. But secondly, like, it's actually what you need to do in that moment. Like, that's something that is, especially with somebody who might be feeling the nerves of the mission. Like, if you took that moment to like needle him, you'd actually be putting him in more danger. And it goes back to something that Iceman says, that Val Kilmer's character says in the first movie, which is like, but whose side are you on? Right? He's saying this to Tom Cruise. He says, like, look, I get it, man. Like, you're doing all this stuff, but I'm more worried about you being up in the air than the enemy right now, because you're reckless and you're putting other people in danger. And like, at the end of the day, like, I don't like you, but like, whose side are you on? Like, we're supposed to be on a team together. And I think that line was so crucial in the first movie. And I think it's really reflected well here. And it's something that I think, I don't know, kind of miss in movies. And I'm glad to see it in this one. But
no, this was definitely a throwback to simple storytelling. I mean, you guys have, calling it a trench. I mean, it's trench run, but a way cooler trench run.
It's cool trench run.
It's a very cool trench
straight
run.
ahead.
Yeah.
But no, it's a throwback, and it's so refreshing. Unfortunately, refreshing, because these seemingly telling these stories, we just can't do that anymore. So there has to be some kind of ulterior motives for the good guy. The good guys can't be good because of something that they didn't do or did. It was nice. It was fun to go to the theater and see actors putting it all out there that you could tell, put months and months and months into just getting physically ready to be in these planes and fly these planes. And just and not have to be like, oh, it's 2022. You have problems. Let's go talk about it. No, let's just go fly some cool planes.
Yeah.
Well, and for all that it was a surprisingly emotional film for me.
Oh yeah.
I cried a few times.
There's a lot of really good beats on that front. But I think that's also a testament to the story construction itself, because like choosing to do what they did with Miles Teller's character, who's Goose's son, again, he's, Bradshaw's son. That matters, because there's a lot, like, even in the first movie, he's a little boy in that movie as a character, right? Like, and he's in it. So one, he's an established character in canon that Tom Cruise had interacted with as kind of an uncle figure, and they were really, really close, and they established that really, really well in the first movie. And so to have them have a split relationship where, his dad obviously died when he was a little boy. His mom died at some point in the intervening years, which we discover throughout the movie. Tom Cruise is his only father figure left, really. And so when Maverick pulls his application to the Naval Academy, or to pilot, I think to the Naval Academy itself.
Naval Academy.
That creates this huge rift between them, and it's a rift that you fully understand. It's like your dad saying that he doesn't think you're good enough, to do what your actual dad did. So there's all these like sort of uncle, stepdad kind of vibes of like, you're a shallow replacement for my real dad who you weren't able to save. And Tom Cruise's, character lives with all of this guilt from, the Goose's death and all this kind of stuff. And all that stuff plays really well because it's organic, it's character driven. It's driven from the original story, and it all actually tracks.
And we discover Maverick's motivation for pulling those papers, and
that was heroic too, by the way. I mean, these are little moments of heroism like that. So I'm going to spoil this because I think this is important. Like the reason he gets asked, Jennifer Connelly asks him at one point, like, does he know why you pulled the papers? And he pulled the papers or the application because he actually, his mom didn't want him to go. And his mom asked him to pull the application. And yet instead of saying, hey, your mom told me to do this, so I just doing what your mom said, Jennifer Connelly asked him if, why, whether or not he knows that it was his mom that actually really asked him to do that. And he said, his mom's dead. Like, why would I, he already hates me. Why would I make him have this bad relationship with her memory? Which I think is a really painful but also very adult thing to do. Like, he is actually protecting this kid from unnecessary pain for no good reason, and protecting the memory of his mom. And I think that's a pretty noble thing to do. I don't know. All that stuff I thought was just really, really well handled. And yeah, it is actually emotional because it feels legit. Like, it's not a sort of fabricated kind of contrived thing. It's like, yeah, that's what like a decent person would actually do in that situation. And by the way, it also goes to what I was saying in this episode, the Out of Frame episode I just put out. Like, heroic characters can and should face dramatic challenges, and that is a perfect example of a dramatic challenge that a morally good character has to face, right? Like, first of all, do you or do you not pull the application on the wishes of the mom, knowing that it's going to wreck your relationship with the son you never had, basically, right? So right off the bat, that's a moral dilemma. Do I do what the mom wants? Do I do what I think is actually right? Because he said he didn't think he was ready at the time too, which is like even more difficult to deal with. Or do you just let this kid sort of rush into something that he wasn't really ready for because it's easier for you not to wreck that relationship? That's a tough choice. That's not an obvious thing, but there's never a doubt that Tom Cruise's character was going to try to do the right thing, right? So he is a morally good character. It's just that he, like everybody, he's facing tough choices that are actual dilemmas, I think that's the thing that drives me nuts about this idea that everybody has to be bad and dark and everything is terrible. It's like if that's the only way to drama, like you're really misunderstanding what is, first of all, what is drama. And secondly, you're misunderstanding that like the world, if you want to be a morally good person, the world doesn't hand you easy choices. It hands you really hard choices all the time. So I don't know. I really dug that. I thought that was a really good aspect of that. But we're coming to the end of our scheduled time here. So I kind of wanted to see if you guys had any, I don't know, if there's anything that maybe even Hampton or Pavel wants to jump in on and bring up from comments. I know Hampton's been leaving some comments in our document here, but I don't know if there's also anything that you guys wanted to say as we kind of wrap up our final episode here.
Yeah, I just thank everyone for watching. That's watching with us live. hanging out with us this afternoon. It's been a pleasure being able to talk movies with you both. And I'm so glad because when we started doing this podcast, it was right after everything shut down and it's pretty bleak for movies. And this was one of those movies that was kind of always the light at the end of the tunnel to actually finally go see. And I'm just thankful that we had the opportunity to go see it in the theater and we got to talk about it. So I think this is actually kind of a perfect movie to end the podcast on. It's very bittersweet, but it's been quite a ride.
Yeah. Thank you again to you two gentlemen for letting me tag along on all of this stuff. It's been an absolute joy to sit down and talk about movies and ideas and storytelling and characters with you two week after week. It's been something that I have consistently looked forward to. And both of you know that I am a crier and I am about to cry. But this has genuinely been one of my favorite projects that I have ever worked on. And I could not imagine doing it with anybody else. And to all of you listening, y'all are why we do this. You are an incredible audience, incredible supporters. And just to have this opportunity to share these ideas with you week after week has been a genuine pleasure.
Yeah. Well, I feel the same way. I also want to say a big thank you to Pavel Ruskov, who has been with us obviously since the beginning, producing the series. Pavel does a tremendous amount of behind the scenes stuff at Fee all the time, in all sorts of ways. He probably turned on the monitors that are behind Paul, set up the mics, set up the cameras that Paul is looking at, and everything else in our studio, and then has done that diligently and without much public appreciation for 6 years, the better part of 6 years at Fee. And so he's the one live streaming everything. He's the one editing audio, editing video, well, quite a lot of the time, especially with this series. Yeah, I mean, like, he basically makes things run so that the rest of us don't really have to pay attention to any of the technical details on any of this stuff. And he's been doing that since the very, very beginning. So I want to say a big fat thank you to Pavel. And then also Matt Hampton, who a lot of you guys know from Discord at this point, or know from the Out of Frame email. But Matt Hampton, I'll talk about what's going to happen with Out of Frame in a second, because this is probably the bigger announcement, something that a lot of people have been wondering about and asking about on Discord and elsewhere. And I've been kind of avoiding answering that question for reasons that I'll explain in a second. But Matt Hampton has also been just this tremendous benefit to the series and to Out of Frame in general. I mean, he's the reason that we have the social media that we've got. He's the reason that he literally, like, pitched the email, the weekly email, and has been, at first, like, wrote or ghost wrote a ton of like Out of Frame email copy. Eventually I just started telling him to sign his own name to it, because like I wasn't really even rewriting very much at the end of the day. And yeah, it's just been tremendous benefit having Matt around. Matt's going to continue to work on social media stuff at Fee, but for a different project, although obviously he's going to stay with, Out of Frame for a little bit. Obviously we're going to do less stuff now that the podcast is not happening. But so I want to talk about the kind of what we're doing with Out of Frame for a little bit. And Paul, I don't know if you want to chime in on this a little bit and talk about it too. But the reason that I've been a little coy about talking about it is because I've been trying to negotiate some stuff with Fee and trying to figure out how my exit from actually being creative director there kind of affects all of these things and everything else. And the big news really is that we're going to end the Out of Frame series. It's not going to happen tomorrow. We're actually going to plan an end for a few months down the road. So I'm going to continue producing feature episodes and shorts for at least the next 3 months, and we're going to sort of sort that out. But while that is happening, what we are trying to do is develop some new content that is going to still live on the same channel. Stuff that you guys are actually going to like. That's our core goal here, is to sort of transition away from me doing, I mean, what you have to understand, and I hope everybody appreciates this, is that like the feature episodes for Out of Frame especially are tremendously time consuming. They are, you know, thousands of hours of my time writing, also Jen's time, you know, co-writing a lot of episodes. Jen's probably going to co-write all of the remaining episodes with me because I just don't have the time to write them all from scratch. Jen has heroically, I said this to her the other day, but like, it's really hard, I think, as a writer to write in somebody else's voice, or to even try to write in somebody else's voice. And it's even harder to accept the fact that if you're co-writing on something that is somebody else's voice, you're not going to be the final arbiter of what goes into the product. And so Jen has, especially all the episodes that she's ever co-written, she's typically handed me a draft that is like somewhere between a half and like 2/3 of an episode that I then rewrite and finish and do all of that kind of stuff. And she's never complained about it one time. Like, I've made drastic changes to things that she's written. I've deleted sections. I've done all kinds of stuff to it, and she's never been upset about it. And I appreciate that, because it's tough to do that, to like write something. And I know everybody gets their own little, they have their babies that they want to stay in, and they probably don't all the time. And so that's a thing. But we're going to do that for the next 3 months, but I can't continue that indefinitely and do the kinds of things that I want to do with Return on Ideas. So I'm going to have to wind that down. But what I'm hoping is that you guys stick around, and that you still give the channel a chance to provide you with more similar content, but probably from different perspectives. So we want to maybe experiment with some things, and we probably experiment with some shorts first and some things like that. But I mean, for the longest time, people have told me that they wanted me to talk about video games. They wanted me to talk about anime. They've wanted me to talk about all kinds of stuff that y'all know, if you care about the series, if you watch the series, you know, I'm just not the right guy for a lot of those things. So I think this is an opportunity, as much as it is kind of a transition, to explore some areas that this series has never really gone before. And so we'll end Out of Frame, but we'll probably carry on with, you know, similar kinds of content, pop culture focused, you know, pop culture commentary that tries to extract the ideas and philosophies and values from entertainment media and that kind of stuff. So I'll kick it over to Paul to talk about some of this. I mean, a lot of this is in development, but I mean, we're going to work pretty hard to make sure that we give you something good.
Our number one goal is to give you guys content that helps you parse through what this, you know, life and all that stuff. And I think Sean's done a great job with Out of Frame, obviously, with bringing videos to everyone that really makes you think and appreciate movies and TV at a deeper level. And that's what we're going to still try to do. And we're going to really also going to be leaning on you guys for feedback and help us drive what we create going forward. Because at the end of the day, we want to make stuff for you. And that's where we get the most satisfaction, is when we're making videos about video games or TV shows or whatever that you guys care about. And what's great about art, there's always a big idea behind it. There's always a reason why that artist made that choice. And we want to keep exploring those ideas. And so, like, my big ask for you guys is, you know, stick with us, but also it's an opportunity to have your voice heard and help us find the new direction for the channel.
Yeah, I don't know how many of you who are listening or who are going to hear this were around when I put up polls asking you to recommend anime. But when I did that, like thousands and thousands of people responded to those polls. And I'm hoping that that's still going to be true. Like I really, what I'll probably do sometime tonight or maybe tomorrow is put up some community posts sort of going through, kind of next steps and like basically this announcement again. But I want to do that with some polls and get your guys' feedback on, I want to do this in Discord too, on what you want next. Like what have I disappointed you with by not covering? I think is one way to look at this. It's like I said, there's a lot of things that I'm not into. And I think that this is a pretty interesting opportunity to sort of shift gears in a way that's not going to feel totally like foreign. Like it's still going to be a lot of the same kinds of things, but maybe focused around stuff that I never really talked about before that you guys are really super interested in. And so hopefully we can make that happen, and we can make that something that is still really exciting and engaging for everybody. I have tons of confidence in the team to be able to do that. So anyway, I think we'll probably end it here. I know everybody's going to have a lot of thoughts and questions about that. I will try to be, I have an appointment with my mother-in-law to watch Stranger Things, but I'll try to be sort of available on Discord and things like that. And I'll make an announcement on Discord and then stick around and actually talk to folks about it. But feel free to ask me whatever you want. But yeah, I really hope that we can keep producing great content on this channel that is similar enough that you're really going to love it, but which maybe takes it in a little bit of a different direction. So yeah, with that said, thank you everyone for listening to this show, for watching this, if you're watching the live stream, for watching Out of Frame, for subscribing to Out of Frame, for joining us on Patreon and Subscribestar. I mean, I didn't really set out to be a YouTuber in that sense. And, as my actions are probably revealing, I didn't really want to do it forever either, but it's been a blast, and it's been really cool getting to do stuff that resonates with enough people that it actually feels super worth doing week after week. So that's been awesome. Yeah. Anyway, thank you everybody. And I'll see you on Discord.